Senator Tyson is going to be joining us online today. First up, do we have any bill introductions? See none? Any from the audience? Rock and roll. We have Tom Bruno with the railroads. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning.
Just a second for our assistant to be here, though.
Okay. There she is.
I was getting the cart ahead of the horse. Got to have the most important person in the room.
Right.
You may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman said, I'm Tom Bruno. I'm here on behalf of the Kansas Railroad Association. That's made up of railroads that do operate here in the state of Kansas. And I'm fairly new in this role. So some of you are looking at me like, where's Mr. Hubble? I'm just helping him out today. And he can yell at me later if I mess something up bad. So in your packet that you should have, it says Kansas Rail 101. The first sheet you'll come to is a nationwide network. Because I'm pretty new at this and learning, I'm starting from ground zero, and I figured that would be the place I'd speak from today. So nationwide, there's about 140,000 miles of active rail in the United States. In Kansas, which is the next page, we have over 4,700 miles. I found that pretty interesting. We would be a top 5 state, I believe, with the number of rail miles. And we actually, according to the AAR's information sheet, we have 4 active Class 1s in the state of Kansas. Being new and trying to learn more and more about this, kind of cramming, one of the interesting points that I took away was the priority of safety in the railroads. They spend a lot of money and they actively partner with their customers and communities and their employees to get to the ultimate goal of 0 accidents. So one of the big areas over the years, the AAR tracks accident rates. So over 99.99% of all hazardous material transported on the rail reaches its final destination safely without any incident. Since 2000, the number of train accidents have declined by over 27%, and derailments, most of which happen in the yard at very low speed and have 0 impact on their community, have gone down by over 30%. And employee injury accidents are down by 50%, and grade crossing accidents are down by 25%. Grade crossing incidents are an area of concern for the railroads because that's where most fatalities occur by crossing users. So that's a big issue. And nationwide, railroads invest in their own infrastructure and maintenance of their equipment, about $23 billion a year, and that's 39 cents out of every dollar of revenue. And you compare that to other industries, it blows it out of the water. So they're spending about 40 cents of every dollar of revenue maintaining and improving their operations. And now, being new, I found a couple real interesting tidbits that really jumped out at me. So railroads are the most fuel-efficient way to move freight on land. They will move 1 ton of freight 500 miles on 1 gallon of fuel, including biofuels. So that's a lot of impact. And then when you look at the number of trucks that it would take to replace the rail networks nationwide, we would need an additional 83 million trucks running on our highways to make up for all the freight that railroads carry across our nation. And I think that's an additional, I think it's on the top of your knee, I think it's 17 million trucks here in Kansas, additional trucks. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to some folks that really do know a thing or two about this. Andy Williams with BNSF. If that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Andy Williams, Executive Director of Public Affairs, BNSF Railway. I'm based at our headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, but I cover Kansas and Colorado, and happy to say that most of my life was spent right here in Kansas, so it's always great to be back here in the capital. And best part about coming to Kansas, I just stay at my sister's house in Lawrence, so it's an easy drive, so no hotel. But thank you for allowing us the time to come in and talk a little bit about the railroads today and let you know a little bit about our presence here in Kansas. As some of you may know, others may not know, the Santa Fe Railroad was founded right here in Topeka, Kansas by Cyrus K. Holliday, who migrated out here back in the 1800s from Pennsylvania. When he got here on the banks of the Kansas River, he wrote back to his wife and said, "I found the perfect place to launch a railroad and to start our life. Please come on out to what now has become known as Topeka, Kansas." His vision when he came out here was to build a railroad that came from Kansas City and went all the way to California. And his vision has become reality. And in fact, that vision that was started back in the 1800s actually just wrapped up a full vision this year whenever we were able to, over the last 6 years, double track the last section of what we consider to be our Transcon, which goes from LA to Chicago. There were 50 miles in the Flint Hills that had never been double tracked. There were a series of sidings, but it wasn't double tracked, which is odd when you consider that's one of the busiest lines on our railroad, going all the way from LA to Chicago. We have over 100 trains a day going that way. So it was a bottleneck. And there was a reason why that hadn't been developed. It was the same reason why they don't grow crops there. There's limestone right there at the surface, and it's very challenging to build track, and it's expensive. Finally, our business elevated to a level that it made sense to make that capital investment. So trains that are going through Kansas from California to Chicago, or maybe it's from Logistics Park in Kansas City to LA or Chicago, now can have directional flow through the state of Kansas, which will increase velocity, help reduce the number of crossings that are blocked. And a lot of these communities like Newton and Sedgwick, Kansas, and some of the other smaller areas in Chase County where we used to redirect traffic while we were constructing over that 6 years, we'll see a break in the number of trains going through those communities as they stay on what is basically an interstate, our Transcon. So I think that you'll see a lot of positive feedback this year going forward regarding the block crossings in and around those communities. Just a little bit about our operations here. We have about 3,000 employees in the state of Kansas. We operate over about 2,000 miles of track. We have key locations, Topeka being one of them, with our payroll department based here, as well as one of our major locomotive overhaul facilities, as well as we have a number of business cars and stuff stored here in Topeka. So it remains a critical part of our network. Add on to that, you have our operations in Argentine, Kansas, which is arguably the largest yard on our network. It's 4 miles long, about 1.5 miles wide, and it's our biggest classification yard. So trains come in from all over, they're split up, rebuilt, and sent out across the network. On top of that, in Kansas City, we have our innovative Logistics Park, Kansas City, which is a intermodal hub, which is kind of the cookie cutter for the rest of the hubs that we are opening up across our country to handle those kinds of consumer goods. And it's not just consumer goods that we handle out of there. We also move freight, wheat, agriculture products. So if you visit our facility, if you haven't, I'd be happy to give you a tour. You have DeLong grain, you have other agriculture commodities that now just pack all their materials into containers. They're put on our ships, moved to the coast, and then exported around the world, which gives our farmers access to markets through every corner of the globe. We also have operations in Wellington, Newton, Wichita, Dodge City, just about every corner of the state. We have these operations, and so we're very glad that Kansas is home to one of our predecessor railroads. We continue to maintain a healthy and robust operations here, and Kansas will continue to be an important part of our network for generations to come. So I'm assuming after this, happy to answer any questions, but at this point, I'm happy to turn it over to our UP representative, Ben Jones. Yeah.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, the members of the committee. My name is Ben Jones. I'm Senior Director of Public Affairs for Union Pacific for the great state of Kansas, but then I also cover Missouri and Oklahoma. I'm based in Kansas City. So Andy was talking about a little bit of their history. You know, Union Pacific, we have our own history. You know, it's not many companies that can say because of Abraham Lincoln that they became into existence. But on July 1st, 1861, President Lincoln signed the Pacific Railroad Act, which basically created Union Pacific, a competition between us and Southern Pacific, who could build the most track, the quickest, and they met later in Promontory Point in Utah. And so we've been around for over 160 years now. Kansas is a very vital state for us. If you look at the grain shipments that come out of Kansas, it is our largest grain state. So they're a big customer of ours. We also serve the GM plant in Fairfax, and then also we serve the Fort Riley plant and a number of other customers throughout the state. We have a large employment base, over 800 employees, and we're really geographically diverse in the state of Kansas. If you look at the fact sheet here, you'll see how we traverse both east and west, north and south. We have large employment base in Marysville, Kansas City, Atchison, Parsons, Wichita, Hutch, and Liberal, Harrington, and then probably Salina as well. So we're throughout the state moving the products that come in and out of the state of Kansas, which is, you know, if you looked at that map that Tom provided earlier, you guys, as you well know, are centrally located to move freight. And a lot of where that growth is coming recently is in the intermodal space. You know, Andy talked about how they've invested in their main line through the state of Kansas. We're also investing our own dollars to support that business that comes through Kansas. We will have a new intermodal yard come online later this year in Kansas City, Kansas. And what I always like to tell people, because I used to work in the legislature myself, is what I love about working for the railroads is we invest our own dollars in our infrastructure. So to put in that major infrastructure project to support intermodal, we're asking the state of Kansas for zero. No tax credits, no special incentives or anything. We're just doing it because that's what best supports business. At the end of the day, you know, Tom also talked about this, safety is the #1 priority. You know, I've worked for the railroad now 17 years, and that has never wavered whatsoever. You heard the statistics that he shared, that we're continuing working to drive down the number of incidents, whether it's grade cross incidences or with our employee safety. That's the #1 priority. And really, another thing that we do to help with safety and help with the communities is, you know, I'm here to help with whether there's an issue in a community, whether it's a block crossing, or if there's anything that your communities have a question about with the railroads. That's what Andy and I are here for, to be a community contact. I know there's been a number of times where a community will call about a block crossing. I will work with our dispatch, and you know, most times I'm able to help out. And you know, I think last year we had 2 years ago, we had a county commissioner testify in front of this committee about a block crossing up in Marysville. And you know, about a month or two later, he called me and said, "Hey, thank you. You really helped with that." So we're an asset here for you. Pat and Tom obviously are as well, but we're here in the communities. And you know, I talked about what I enjoy working for the railroad is not asking the state for dollars, but really another fun part of my job, at least, is helping the communities with their philanthropy, nonprofits. You'll see here that we gave over $275,000 last year to Kansas communities through our foundation and community giving. And I'm always looking for good opportunities to do that. So if you have a UP community in your district, we have a foundation that in the spring will take applications and will get awarded later in the summer. Those foundation awards will range between about $5,000 to $15,000, $20,000, depending on the project. We also have some community funds available to help sponsor things in networks or in communities. I know like the chili event up there in Marysville that we always sponsor. So we're here to be an asset for you. You know, Kansas is rail rich. And I think it's something that the state should lean a little bit more into. You know, just think if you took all the dollars that we put into our infrastructure, like, for example, last year we did, $800 million into infrastructure. If you were to transfer that over to the state budget, that would be a pretty big challenge. So I think the railroads provide a huge benefit for the state of Kansas, and we want to continue to be a partner with the state. So anytime that we need to be at the table talking about issues, helping the state to move forward on economic development, safety, or anything, we're here to be a part of that discussion. So that wraps up what I have to say, and I'll turn it over to Riley to help with the short line presentation.
Riley, you want to come introduce your guest?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Riley Scott. I represent Watco, which is a short line rail company based in Pittsburgh, Kansas, of course, but then also Cimarron Valley Rail, which is in southwest Kansas. And I believe Bruce Carswell should be on and testifying virtually if he's ready to go. Bruce is with Jaguar Transportation. They're the holding company of CVR.
Good morning. Yes, I am on.
Good morning. We can hear you.
Thank you, Chairman Peterson, members of the committee. I'm Bruce Carswell. I am with the Cimarron Valley Railroad. We're a over 200-mile short line railroad, southwest Kansas. We serve mainly the agriculture industry, although that's changed over time. We do have some manufacturing. Our one of our newest customers is a large renewable diesel facility in Hugoton. Our railroad has experienced some fairly significant growth in the last 10 years. And a lot of that growth is primarily due to the support of the state of Kansas. I will talk about, short lines a little bit in general. Kansas is home to 13 different short lines and 2 switching and terminal railroads in the larger metropolitan areas. We've got just short of 2,000 miles of track in the state, which is a sizable proportion of the overall rail mileage. We're a critical first mile, last mile carrier, serving as a connection between the large carriers that you heard from earlier and outer portions of the rural parts of the state. The railroads deregulated in the 1980s with the Stegers Act, and that allowed the larger railroads to more easily get rid of some of their lower density, underperforming lines that were creating some financial hardships. Some of those rail lines unfortunately got abandoned because they just were not sustainable, but a number of them were then turned over to smaller companies, more entrepreneurial type approaches, and that really did create what we call the modern short line industry. Over time, a lot of those lines had become, deferred maintenance, and therefore, there was a bit of a challenge in the earlier years of trying to keep those rail lines sustainable. The state of Kansas actually did a fairly, Herculean effort through some of their state programs to help invest in those rail lines and ensure that they remained viable and were able to serve those rural communities. Our railroad in particular, over 10 years ago, was really on the cusp of potential abandonment, and a partnership between ourselves, the state of Kansas, a county organization comprised of all of the counties we operated through, combined together to put an initial $15 million investment in the railroad, which really did, keep the lights on, and we've built from there, many times over. Where the railroad now is definitely sustainable, and traffic has grown 2 to 3-fold over that 10-year period. The current rail service improvement program is definitely a very valuable vehicle for shoreline infrastructure projects that allow public-private partnerships to keep that infrastructure in a state of good and safe repair. We are currently working on a project in conjunction under that program with KDOT to install a new siding outside of Dodge City to accommodate that increase in traffic I described. It'll help ensure fluidity, velocity, and facilitate even further growth in our traffic as the years go on. There is a state shoreline tax credit program, which is very valuable. That's, essentially gives us a credit and it incentivizes us to accelerate our infrastructure investments. The economic development program under KDOT also has been very valuable. And I described the renewable diesel plant earlier. When that large investment, I think $350 million was being made by Seaboard Farms and Seaboard Energy. The state did also assist with some of the rail infrastructure under that economic development program. And then finally, the state of Kansas has partnered with railroads, including ourselves, on applying for federal grants. Most notably, recently, the so-called CRISI program, which stands for Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Program. Cimarron Valley was a successful applicant along with KDOT on a large grant application, and overall, amongst all of the railroads, Kansas has benefited from over $100 million in grants from the federal government to the state shoreline system. You heard earlier, safety is, a very, very key goal for the railroad industry in general, and short lines are no different. We put a lot of time, effort, training, investment into ensuring safe transit through all of our communities. And the Cimarron Valley has actually recently achieved 1 year without a single injury, which is a major milestone in the heavy transportation business, and we're very proud of that. Our first mile, last mile access, as I stated earlier, is primarily focused in the rural communities, and without those short-line railroads, I mean, the most certain thing that would happen was a significant shift to truck transportation, putting more stress on state and county roads. By and large, it would also incur a higher shipping cost, and some businesses just wouldn't be viable without that rail connection to the national network. Short lines, as I was saying in summary, it is a key part of the Kansas economy, and the state of Kansas and the partnership through the state programs and KDOT has been a vital part of keeping the short line industry viable and safe. So appreciate your time, and I'll turn it back over to Riley.
Committee, are there questions for Andy, Ben, or Bruce? I have one. Could someone, I don't care who addresses it, someone address a little bit about the cost per mile to install a rail and the different types of rail?
Really, it depends on what you're looking to do. If you're just talking about track mile, I think it's approximately $1 million. But if you're doing like an economic development project that requires a power switch and different types of other technology that goes into it, that'll be a lot higher. I know sometimes folks are doing an economic development project in their communities. They'll say, oh, here's a rail, let's build the project, then we'll go to the railroads and ask. Well, no, you need to, that's another thing, we probably should have stressed. If you know of an economic development project in your community, have them come to the railroad first, because there's a lot of factors that will determine whether or not it can be railed served and what that cost is going to be, if it's something that's cost prohibitive, or is there a better location? So I try to answer the question best as I can, but it really depends.
And so I just, with all the new members on the committee, wanted them to realize how expensive the rail really is. Does anybody want to take a shot at the different types of rail, like the different weights for rail? If not, we can maybe hit Ty up when he gets up.
No, I know on the class one, it's what, 250, what is it, two?
They'll go all the way down 98.
Yeah. Yeah, 256 is kind of the, when we ask for short lines to build into us or a new customer, it's 256 to build into us. Because you kind of look at the class one railroads as kind of the interstate highways of the rail network. Whereas, you heard from the short line presentation, they're the feeder system of the highway system into the interstate. So, just like the interstate highway requires a certain type of pavement, so does class ones to operate on, at least on our main lines.
I know we were trying to get some of the short lines in,
Yep.
Sure, yeah, I was just going to add, you may be familiar with the Southwest Chief, which actually stops here in Topeka before it goes on eventually to California. There's parts of our track that we just don't move much freight. From Hutchison West, it was old, what we called jointed line. So it was smaller gauge line that was, 60, 90 feet long, and then there'd be another joint. And so for the longest time, Amtrak would have to get there, and we put a slow order in that they couldn't go 79. They had to slow down to 40 miles an hour because the track wasn't rated for high-speed trains. And we'd run 10 trains a week maybe, and it would be corn or wheat, and we don't need those trains to go 90 miles an hour or 79. So Amtrak, in their own interest, wanted it upgraded. Garden City, the city officials there led a multi-state coalition to get some federal grants to upgrade that to ribbon rail, high-gauge ribbon rail, so they'd be able to operate Amtrak. So it depends on what kind of track that you want to put in and the terrain and the number of bridges that kind of dictate the cost. But another thing that people overlook now is we're getting into more and more wayside detectors on the equipment to make sure that there's safety involved with the rail. So some of those can be hot bearing detectors. We're really pioneering acoustic sound waves that can see cracks in wheels and on track, and those can be like up to $300,000 a unit. So depending on how far you space those out, and depending on what kind of traffic, can have a big impact on how much infrastructure costs. But one thing I would say, regardless of the cost, railroads maintain and build their own infrastructure. Every year, we spend between $3 and $5 billion just on our own maintenance and networking across our facilities. So it's very expensive.
Thank you. Also want to pass on a thank you for you. I was at a pizza place here during the last winter storm a couple weeks ago, and I hadn't heard anything about crossings until I was in this pizza place. And the people were talking about the trains, and they were so impressed that they not only had parked the train and on the side and split it to where they could get through to their street, but they left room enough for people to see around. And I just had to smile on that. So I wanted to pass that along. People were. It was a bunch of, I left and drove down to look at it, and it was BNSF, looked like auto hauler cars that were on the siding.
Thank you. It's a 250 feet setback that was a rule passed.
I think you were doing it ahead of time, and they just made the rule to catch up.
Yep, you're exactly right.
Next up, I guess we have Ty Dragoo. State your name and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ty Dragoo. I represent Smart Transportation. For the purpose of this conversation, Smart Transportation represents approximately 6,000 railroad workers in the state of Kansas, active and retired. We are the organization that is enacted by law through the Railway Labor Act. We have to have labor management together when we do agreements and all those types of things that help run our nation's freight system. So SMART represents conductors, engineers, all the crafts, signalmen, maintenance away. I'm actually hold seniority on Union Pacific Railroad out of Marysville, Kansas. I'm a fourth-generation railroad, and actually this year is my 20th year working for the railroad. It's hard to believe. I heard Promontory Point mentioned during previous testimony. My great-great-grandfather was actually on the section gang in the state of Nebraska that helped build that rail going into Promontory Point. So it's something that I think you all definitely recognize and see in your communities. In Kansas, everyone knows someone that has worked for the railroad or is working for the railroad. There's a lot of heritage behind it. There's a lot of pride behind it. One of the things that makes our jobs very unique, the Kansas infrastructure is our office place. It's our desk. The cab of a locomotive is where we go to work every day. So when we're out there, not only are we moving our nation's freight, but a lot of times when we do have accidents, we are the first responders. Something that I'm looking forward to during this legislative session possibly is we're going to be working on some grade crossing issues collaboratively with the Class 1s, and I'm looking forward to that. When these accidents happen, again, we're the ones that are the first ones there responding and doing what we can to render aid. Along with that comes a lot of training. Conductors and engineers are federally licensed, so we have to hold a federal certification in order to operate our trains across our nation's railway network. Hazardous materials certification, all those types of things go into years of training and knowledge, and there's a lot more that goes on when we're moving freight instead of just sitting in the cab of the locomotive. So those are the things that I hope this committee is aware of. Our schedules, we don't work 9 to 5. We get a phone call 4 a.m. Christmas Day, get on a train. We get a phone call, maybe we've been home and we got 12 hours rest and we're thinking we're going to go to our kids' high school play or soccer game. Phone's ringing, get on a train. We sign up for that. We understand that. But that's one of the things that's a sacrifice, and we look forward to doing that because we take pride in what we do and we're a professional workforce in what we do. One of the things that's really impressive about Kansas, I want to circle back on, to get anything from Southern California, the Inland Empire, over to the East Coast, about 80% of it comes through the state of Kansas. In the 1980s, it usually took 4 to 5 days to get from the Inland Empire to the state of Kansas. They're averaging right now 2 to 3 days. So you heard BNSF talking, the workers affectionately call Kansas section of the Transcon the racetrack. That's what it is. If you look at it, it's a huge circular network in the United States, and the big leg of it goes through the state of Kansas. So Kansas is a key state when it comes to moving our nation's economy, something we take a lot of pride in. The other thing I want to hit on before I open myself up for questions, railroaders don't pay into Social Security tax. It's something that comes up every now and then in the legislature. Federally, by law, railroaders on railroad retirement do not pay Social Security tax. They pay railroad retirement tax, and that tax cannot be taxed at the state level. So again, that's something that's been on the books for a long time, and that's something the Class 1 railroads and the unions have always worked together on. It's a benefit. When I talk about that work schedule that we have, one of the advantages of working that is I can retire when I'm 60 years old, not 65, 66, and railroad retirement tends to be a higher benefit. But that railroad retirement is 100% paid in by our members, by our employees. There's no tax dollars that go into that. So we pay our standard tax, which is the Social Security rate, but then we pay an additional 1.9% on top of that that goes into that railroad retirement fund. And of course, we enjoy the spoils of that when we retire. So again, when it comes to railroading, I'm a through freight conductor. I have seniority on it. I represent the members out there that are railroading every day. We know what we're talking about when it comes to railroading. If I can be a resource for you, I'm here to help. many of you senators have strong constituencies of railroads. Senator Bowers, huge railroad community. So you guys get it, you know it, and we're always glad to be here when we work together with the railroads on things. We want them to do good, because if they're doing good, we're getting paychecks, right? Okay. So with that, I can stand for any questions.
Committee questions. Senator Klemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the update. You brought up on that you don't pay into Social Security. Was there a reason you brought that up just for edification, or is there?
The reason I brought it up is not the last couple of years, but there's sometimes in the legislature, there's an idea about, hey, we're going to have railroad retirement paying state income tax on those earnings. So I just plant a seed there, always plant a seed. If it comes up, these guys all know what I'm talking about. So just so you know, I can't do it.
Committee, further questions for Ty? Ty, you want to talk a little bit about the safety process goes through, like before you start something on a railroad? I mean.
Yeah, so one of the things that, and as the Class 1's discussed, and also Amtrak's a Class 1, one of the things that we really are prideful on and we really focus on, when you show up to work, when you will get in that yard office, you have a set amount of time to get your paperwork put together, get your train orders, have a safety briefing. Rule number one on the railroad, when you step in railroad property, on railroad property, you're going to have a job briefing. And that's all crews that are involved in today's movement. Whether or not it's, if I'm getting on at Marysville going to North Platte, it's just me and my engineer having a job briefing, or we're going to go out in the yard and we're going to switch the bull track 300 cars today. All the crews that are working around us will have a job briefing. So what that entails is usually the footboard yard master or the yard master, he or she will say, here's today's plan of action. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. Does everyone have an understanding of what's going to happen? And we'll go around like, you'll be a switch crew, you'll be a switch crew, you'll be a switch crew. And they'll go, do you understand? Do you understand? Do you understand? And when we have that job briefings done, if there's any deviation whatsoever, we stand down. So in the course of the work throughout the day, if something changes, get on the radio. If we don't have radios, we'll use hand signals. We'll shut work down. We'll all convene back together, make sure we're on the same page. Because when little things happen on the railroad, the problem is these little things are happening with 200-ton pieces of equipment. So that little thing can be a massive, massive thing. So we take it very seriously. Our employers take it very seriously. And it's something that it's paramount. So it's funny because, like your question, when you walk on a railroad property and you're not a railroader, people are always like, what are we doing? Why are we wasting this time talking about who's going to do CPR, who's going to call 911? It's because we're in these huge, wide open spaces with huge, heavy machinery. And, you know, rules on the railroad are written in blood, right? So the reason we have these things in process is because something has happened in the past that we looked at and said, it would have been a good idea to do this. Maybe it would have prevented that thing. It is, Mr. Chairman, as you know, it's a big, big deal on the railroad.
I mean, work near some sidings at a refinery. They are serious about safety, and it is a good thing. Committee, further questions? Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to everyone in the room. I do have 14 counties, and I have everyone's presence. I would feel amiss if I didn't point out Carl Railroad is based in Phillipsburg, which that short line is very important to our ag economy where I come from. And through all the years I've been here, reaching out to whoever I could, that a farmer is asking to have a cars moved because he's trying to get to the elevator, how responsive people are to that. And my folks in Marysville, when they're having intersections blocked, how they do reach out to us. And I know I can go to any of you to say, I need help for my people. So thank you for always being engaged with me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, further questions? Seeing no further business to come before us, we are adjourned.